The flock of Russian drones that entered Poland from Belarus on Tuesday and Wednesday this past week was a sharp reminder of how easily the war in Ukraine could spread rapidly into mainland Europe. Europe is a continent that is already on the edge. Russia is attacking Ukraine at an unprecedented scale. Russia is now spending nearly 7% of its gross domestic product on its military. It is also training school children in basic martial arts. There is widespread uncertainty about what President Trump and his commitment is to Ukraine or to European security. Does he really care about Europe at all? He's been sending mixed signals anyway. Polish, Ukrainian, and many Western officials believe that the Russian drone barrage was intentional. It was to test Europe and NATO's defenses. Russia was also sending a reminder to European countries that their idea of sending troops to Ukraine as some kind of a security guarantee would be very risky. Through the drone barrage, Russia has got important intelligence for the future. It is also testing and revealing NATO's readiness and responses in case of an incursion. With President Trump downgrading American financial and military support for Ukraine, President Vladimir Putin of Russia is trying to test American responses. Presuming the drone attacks are deliberate, Russia is pushing the buttons to see what the Americans will do. The ultimate target of these provocations is not so much Europe or Ukraine, it is actually the United States. Moscow is seeking to pressurize Washington by testing NATO, knowing that America will ultimately have to make some key calls about European security.
No, the First Lady actually got along great with Putin, right, as I did. But, you know, we're disappointed, both of us are disappointed that this ridiculous war continues.
The Trump administration is conducting a wholesale review of American troops that are stationed abroad. And the expectation is that thousands of American troops will be pulled out of Europe. They will either be moved to Asia or they will be returned home to America. That is why countries that are geographically close to Russia, whether it's Poland or the Baltic countries like Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, have dramatically increased their military spending. It was also their way of hoping to convince President Trump to leave the American troops stationed in Europe. Poland is particularly engaged in a huge and expensive build-up of its own military. On Wednesday, it turned to NATO partners for consultations under Article 4 of the NATO Charter. Article 4 allows any member of NATO to ask for a collective meeting on collective defense when that member feels threatened. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said that this was the closest that Poland has been to open conflict since World War II.
Ale ta sytuacja, która stawia nas wszystkich bliżej otwartego konfliktu, bliżej niż kiedykolwiek po II wojnie światowej. Mamy pełnoskalową wojnę za naszą granicą, ukraińsko-rosyjską, ale mamy już coś, co przekracza granicę zwykłych prowokacji u nas, na naszym niebie. I może dzisiaj trzeba znowu bardzo głośno i wyraźnie powiedzieć. Polska ma dzisiaj wroga politycznego, który nie kryje swoich wrogich zamiarów za wschodnią granicą.
Trump, who has often criticized European countries for spending too little on their defense, has spoken favorably about Poland. In fact, Poland, which is long suspicious of Moscow and its intentions, is spending close to 5% of its GDP on defense. It is among the highest in any NATO country. Trump even met with the new Polish president, Karol Nawrocki, in the very week before Russia sent its barrage of drones. NATO countries believe that once the fighting in Ukraine ends, Russia would be prepared to test NATO itself over the next 5 years. This episode underscores the need for NATO to beef up its own defenses, particularly against modern-day drone warfare. They say that the influx of Russian drones into Poland is a provocation and it's a warning. The incursion of the drones was also seen as a warning to European countries not to send any troops to Ukraine as part of any kind of security assurance or security guarantee. That is something Russia has consistently opposed. In fact, since the Alaska summit that happened between President Trump and President Putin, the attacks by Russia have only increased. Over a 3-week period, Russian drones and missiles have struck increasingly sensitive sites in Ukraine. First, it was an American factory in the western part of Ukraine, then 2 European diplomatic compounds, including a British Council building, and then there was a key Ukrainian government building itself right in the heart of Kiev, all of which was targeted, and now there is Poland. Russia has walked over a Western red line gradually. It has gauged the Western response as it goes along, blunting any pushback by escalating slowly. The drones that flew into Poland prompted NATO to send warplanes to shoot them down. This was the first time that NATO troops engaged with Russian weaponry since the end of World War II. Russian drones flying into Poland during the massive attack on Ukraine shows that Putin's sense of impunity is only growing. He's become much more emboldened because there are no consequences to his actions.
Whether it was intentionally or not, it is absolutely reckless. It is absolutely dangerous. But as I said, the full assessment is ongoing. And to Putin, I mean, my message is clear. Stop the war in Ukraine. Stop the escalating war, which he is now basically mounting on innocent civilians and civilian infrastructure. Stop violating Allied airspace. And know that we stand ready. That we are vigilant and that we will defend every inch of NATO territory.
And after the drones entered Polish airspace on Wednesday, a Russian ally, Belarus, issued a statement suggesting that it had actually crossed the Belarusian border by accident. So there is a degree of deniability for Russia. In fact, before the Belarusian clarification came forth, the Russian government initially alleged that the drones had actually flown in from Ukraine. The basis of what they were saying was that it was Ukraine that was the one that was deliberately trying to provoke this war inside NATO territory, inside NATO's red lines. That got clarified by the Belarusian statement. It could also be, as some analysts are pointing out, to de-escalate and then escalate strategy that Russia is hoping it can use to gain leverage in its negotiations with Ukraine, which eventually has to come to a peace agreement. Right now, though, Putin seems to be testing Europe and NATO and their red lines. And he seems to be getting away with it.
Fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.